Hello, everyone. My name is Alyson Campbell with Estrela Consulting. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being patient. We had to run a few Zoom updates, but want to thank our two presenters that are here tonight, Leo Genders and Jack Bonnet. I'm going to introduce them in just one moment. They are representing both West Point, which is the United States Military Academy, and the United States Naval Academy. And we just want to thank you for your service to our country. So thank you both for being here and for all that you do. How our webinar is going to be set up tonight, the chat is actually disabled, but if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. And then I'm the one moderating it, so we'll get to those at the end. Our hope is to run for about 40 minutes or so and then leave some questions that you can hopefully ask live, or I can read them off, obviously, through the Q&A box. If there are questions that we don't get to, if there are questions maybe for particular academies not represented, I will do my best to get those answered for you and get that information back out to you, or maybe give you a different resource that would be helpful. So first we'll start with Captain Leo Genders. Is that on here? There we go. So Captain Leo Genders is a 2017 graduate of the United States Military Academy, also known as West Point. He's a native of Lancaster, Ohio, and currently resides in the greater Richmond, Virginia area. Leo has a bachelor's in science and engineering and industrial management, and he has a breadth of experience within the military as a cadet, having a role in Army recruitment, a deployment tour in Afghanistan, a variety of leadership assignments within the military, and now is pursuing a second master's degree while serving as a capabilities officer with the Army Futures Command. So welcome, Leo.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem. And then next up, we have Jack Bonnet, who's a 2000 graduate of the United States Naval Academy with a Bachelor's of Science in Ocean Engineering. Jack served 2 overseas deployments, first as an infantry platoon commander in Japan, and also in Thailand, and then the second as an infantry company executive officer in Kuwait and Iraq. From 2004 to 2006, Jack served as an officer selection officer based out of Gainesville, Florida, where he recruited and worked with college students attempting to earn a commission in the Marine Corps. Jack has since transitioned out of the military and is involved in various aspects of the commercial real estate industry as an operator, investor, and developer. And he has been a Navy Blue and Gold officer since 2021, which helps in the awareness and informal recruitment process for students interested in the Naval Academy. So welcome, Jack.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're so glad you guys are here. And so when I was doing a little bit of research on you guys, I also realized that you have a fun fact that you both share, that you were both varsity athletes at your respective academies. So I have Leo was a part of the men's gymnastics team and Jack was a cross country and track athlete, which is really cool. I've also seen that it's very important to be physically fit as a part of either one of these military academies. So if you don't really like physical activity, you should just log off now. Just kidding. But true though, right? Physical fitness is a big piece of this.
Of course.
Yeah, it is.
Well, good. Like I had mentioned too, like we very much understand there are 5 military academies, obviously West Point and the Naval Academy, but also the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. There's the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in New York and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in Connecticut. So if you are hoping to get some information on those 3 other academies, again, please drop it in the Q&A. Maybe our presenters might be able to help you with that. If not, I will do my best to get that information to you, or maybe connect you with the person that would be able to help you with that. So we're going to look a little bit into our agenda for tonight. So here we have, we're going to talk a little bit about providing a purpose. Why are we choosing a military academy? What's so special about it? And what stands out as a good cadet? We're going to talk more about timelines and tactics. So there is definitely specific things you need to be mindful of if you're applying to a military academy. There is far more runway necessary for applying to a military academy, which we'll talk about, the extra elements that you're going to need to be taking into account when you're applying, and then things that are academy specific. So I'm going to ask both of these gentlemen to talk a little bit more in depth about those items. We'll talk a little bit about setting up for success. So depending on where you are on the spectrum of the application process, if you're just investigating the military academies, if you are, you're dead set on this is your future, your dream, like what can you be doing now to prepare? We're going to get a little insight on what are the academies looking for, and then how can you make yourself stand out? Because there's very limited space at these academies and they want the absolute best of the best. So we're going to hopefully help give you some keys and best practices to do that. And then we'll talk about what's next. So you get accepted, how do you move forward? So we're going to kick it off again with providing a purpose. And I have just a few quotes that I had taken off of the admissions websites from both the Military Academy and the Naval Academy. But obviously, when you're looking at a military academy, they're looking to develop the nation's top military leaders. You are commissioned as an officer once you graduate from the military academies. They're looking for top academic talent. Again, the best and the brightest minds in the US is who they want leading the charge and leading the country. And again, we talked a little bit about that physical excellence piece and definitely a service component. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Building character, they're demanding discipline. I mean, there's a very demanding schedule for the students that are at the military academies. It's highly academic. They have some of the top academic programs in the country. And then obviously the post-grad military service commitment. So Leo, I'm going to start with you. What were some of the aspects that drew you to apply to West Point when you were a high school student?
Yeah, so I think a number of things. I come from a military background. My father served 20 years and retired as an engineer officer. And my uncles all served as well. So I come from a pretty strong foundation of folks that have done this. They've all gone on the Army side. My dad's really been the only officer. But that was my main motivation, is to follow in my family's footsteps. And then being able to do gymnastics was just such a great bonus, on top of that. But I had been exploring enlisting as well, and looking at different commissioning options such as RTC. And so those are definitely on my radar, or those are on, some backup plans. But really the motivation came from wanting to serve my country and follow my family's footsteps.
That's great. Jack, as you get to know these students that are going through this process and they want to learn more about the academies, what are some things that stand out specifically to you? Like, what are you looking to see in people that are seeking your guidance?
Yeah, I mean, typically a good candidate is going to be well-rounded, not just a great student, not just a great athlete, but has a good combination of both. Probably some leadership experience, but at the very least, just initiative to that. They really kind of take control of their academic curriculum and their schedule, and they're just kind of the independent operator. Not just be following kind of what they think they're supposed to do, what their friends are doing, or what the parents want them to do, but really kind of initiative driven. Some of the red flags are kind of really around the motivation to go to the academy. If you're looking for this full scholarship, and that's kind of really what's driving you, then probably not a great recipe for success. You really have to be motivated to serve in the military afterwards, because that's what the academies are all about, is developing those future leaders. And the whole application process is really kind of an interview process for someone they think is going to be potentially in the service leading for 20 years after college. So if the motivation is not kind of service oriented, then it's maybe not the best fit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We actually had this discussion before we started. There's really brilliant minds and tremendous athletes, but that commitment piece is really the key, and to understand what that takes and what that looks like. I would recommend, even like I would send videos that I would find on YouTube of plebe week, or what a day in the life. Like sometimes they do kind of like the Instagram takeovers where a cadet will do, or a midshipman will do a day in the life of what it looks like, and that's very sobering to some kids that they think they want this prestige, and they think this would be a great opportunity, which it definitely is. But if you're not used to, having someone up in your face, if you're not used to having a 6 a.m. wake up call, but especially that service commitment afterwards, that's something that needs to certainly be explored. So thank you for that. We're going to talk a little bit about, like I said, timelines and tactics. So we'll start with timelines. Jack, what would you say that students that are thinking about the military academies informally, like if they're just exploring, when does that usually start?
Exploring typically sophomore, junior year, ideally at the latest. At this point, if you're a junior, you've hopefully done the pre-application. If not, then you want to get on that right away. And that kind of puts you into the pipeline as a candidate. And then the bulk of the application process really happens in the summer between the junior and senior year. That's when you're getting kind of all the work done and tracking down your teachers even during the summer to get letters of recommendation, or you're doing that before the end of the junior year. You're taking that next standardized test if you feel like you need it, and you're getting your application submitted so that you can get going on the medical side. The medical side can be the longest process for some folks. If you're not just immediately cleared and there's some follow-up required, that process can take quite a while, and that can hold up a lot of folks for several months sometimes. So that's why I encourage everybody to really get on all the steps of the application process right away.
And I noticed, I don't know if this is just specific to the Naval Academy, but maybe West Point as well. If you apply to the summer seminar or the summer program as a sophomore or junior, that could count as your pre-application, correct?
That's correct. You automatically be put in as a candidate. You take the candidate fitness assessment test. Yeah, at summer seminar you can use that score. If you have a good score, then that's already done, which is just one step out of the way.
Yeah, and I think that would be a great opportunity if you have the means and you have the time and the opportunity to do a program like that, to truly see. I mean, they're going to give you probably the next best experience in just that microcosm of time if this is going to be a good fit for you. So before you're going through that entire process and going for a congressional letter, which we're going to talk about next, just knowing, if I can do this for a few weeks, can I do this for 4 years?
The summer seminar, and I think that West Point has a similar program, is in June, and it's for rising seniors. It's too late this year if you're a rising senior to apply, but if you're a rising junior or thinking about it, if you're a freshman and think about it a couple years from now, then you need to apply, I think, kind of February, March timeframe of your junior year in order to get that summer seminar slot. So.
Okay, that's good to know. So we talked.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Leo.
I was going to say West Point has one as well. It's called the Summer Leadership Experience, and timelines are very similar. But the same thing, right? It's a handover into the portal as a candidate, and so we just call it something different. Ours is a couple weeks as well, and so it's a really good opportunity. Like you had already mentioned, I think Jack had said it too. It's like a taste test, right? To see if it's a good fit, but it's not the whole commitment, and so it's a great opportunity to go through some of that screening too, because it is rigorous just to do the application on that at times. But it's a great opportunity. My wife actually did it. She did it at the Naval Academy and West Point, and so that experience actually is what she leveraged to make her decision. And so I would encourage anyone, if they've got the time, they've got the summer to do it, to go ahead and try to do it.
For me personally, I did the summer seminar way back in the summer of 1995. And I came back. That was the decision maker for me. I came back. This is it. This is where I want to go. So there was a
that would make or break. You know what I mean? You're either going to love it and be like, this is my place, this is exactly what I'm looking for, or absolutely no way. There's probably not a lot of in between after an experience like that.
Right.
So yeah, we talked a little bit about there's like basically some essential elements to even being able to apply to either the academies: being a US citizen, being of a certain age, not married, not having dependents. And then you would do this application questionnaire. Essentially, it's kind of like a pre-screen that would open up the portal to continue your application. So we talked a little bit about that and what the timelines would be. It says that it opens February 1st actually the dates are the same for both the Naval Academy and West Point, opening February 1st of your junior year and then closing January 31st of your senior year. That's when that candidate questionnaire is open. So it's kind of a pre-screen. So Leo, we did touch very briefly on the congressional nomination. So that is an element of the application process that is not going to be shared by someone looking at Ohio State or Duke or UNC or Southern Cal. So can you tell us what is a congressional nomination?
Yeah, so I went through this. I was actually applying to the Naval Academy first. And so I went through the congressional process for that nomination um, in my junior year leading up to it. And so um, what I did, I took the advice of some graduates within the area. I walked into my congressman's office with a handwritten letter and went with my dad and sort of worked our way into an appointment. We didn't get one that day, but we made a face to face, right? And that was, let's see, that would have been like summer of 2011, I believe. And so the virtual scheduling totally existed at the time. You could call, make an appointment. I remember, arguing with my dad. No, we can just call. We don't have to go in person. But I can tell you that that face to face, that handwritten letter that I didn't see the value of, did so much for the process because they remembered me, right? And just being able to get any sort of advantage that you can is helpful, right? And so I'm sure there's virtual scheduling that you can do now. You probably do it over Zoom, but I would still recommend the face to face, right? It just there's so much more gravity to it. It's almost like you're much more serious, right? That there's a level of commitment that you don't get on a virtual option. So I would encourage folks to explore that. I'm sure there's varying levels to that, right? You could go in person, you could send a letter. I did both, and I hand wrote it, and the person I interviewed with actually remembered that, right? And so, like I said, anytime you can get an advantage or something to help you be remembered is going to be great. And I do know that they have some volunteer opportunities in the summers as well. So depending on your Congress, that office, I would take a look at that too, because that could be a great opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you went face to face. I think it's so easy just to make the virtual appointment or to send the email or whatnot, but that definitely shows initiative. It shows maturity. And like you said, it makes you stand out. So I appreciate that tip. And hopefully that's a good tip that our viewers will take to heart as well. Okay, so our next point, Jackie's talked a little bit about this. I'm going to go back to you again. We were joking about how you guys are, both former collegiate athletes, which is fantastic. But could you talk to us a little bit about the physical fitness and the medical readiness piece? Like you said, it was, probably one of the longer processes, but can you just tell us what that entails?
Sure. So for the application, there's a physical assessment test that you'll take. It's I think the identical for West Point. Uh, yeah, I believe it's the same. But anyway, it's kind of a whole body, fitness test. There's 6 events: pull-ups, push-ups. There's a 1-mile run. There's a shuttle throw. There's a shuttle, or not shuttle throw, a basketball throw, a shuttle run, and pull-ups. And you don't have to max that out. You don't have to be a complete stud on the fitness assessment. You just need to be pretty good. You should be strong in some areas, and you're probably gonna have 1 or 2 events that you're not as strong in, and that would be normal. So it's not something, if you're an athlete, then chances are you're going to do okay. You're going to be just fine, and that's not going to be a difference maker. If you don't do regular activity, then that is something you definitely would need to train for more so. And anybody should be training for and preparing for the assessment test. And in the score, the test guidelines are on the Naval Academy admissions website, as with I'm sure West Point. So that's all out there. The medical side is really kind of a pass fail initially. The trigger to get scheduled for a medical appointment is once you submit the application, all the information about the application portion of all the different steps. That's the portion where all your personal information and all your when you kind of outline, all your extracurricular activities, just kind of the normal fill in the blank, but it also has the personal statement, the essay. And that's the part that usually holds people up, because that's the part nobody wants to do. And I understand that it is the probably the most challenging part, at least it is for me. But once you submit your essay, at least for the Naval Academy, that's when they schedule the medical exam, and it'll just be with a local doctor that's in the network. You go there. If you pass it, then it's done. It just gets put in the system as a medically qualified candidate. If you've had any kind of medical history, obviously there's an extensive medical history you have to fill out. But if you had, a broken leg or things like that, that may require follow-up, and they may want additional documentation. And that all goes through the Department of Defense Medical Exam Review Board, which is called DODMERB for short. It's a organization that runs this process for all the service academies. And so it's the same regardless of whether you're going to Air Force Academy, Coast Guard, or West Point, or I think with Merchant Marine as well. That process can be the part that takes a while, is that there's a little bit of back and forth, and you submit your documents and you're waiting. And if there's something that's considered disqualifying, it may be waiver eligible, but the waiver is up to each individual academy. So the actual qualifying requirements are the same for all service academies, but whether a waiver will be granted is up to the individual academy and their admissions process. So sometimes things get hung up. I've had candidates that got the waiver from West Point but just never got it from the Naval Academy, and got turned down that way, and vice versa. So, but that process, you can be in limbo for several months sometimes if you have a medical history issue. So that's why let's say jump on it, get the essay in, and then.
Yeah, that sounds like it needs a little bit more time to develop. Leo, you had a comment to add as well?
Yeah, I did. So I actually went through that. I had some stress fractures in my back applying from gymnastics. And so I actually didn't get into the Naval Academy because of DODMER, the medical process, right? And so as I looked at West Point, I really didn't even have an answer, to be honest, until about April. And I worked on everything, months ahead, like almost a year ahead. And so I would just say, just to echo that, right, that the standards are set, but then where that waiver eligibility comes in, or it's really risk acceptance, right? Depending on the academy, it makes a big difference, right? And so the waiver for my back injury went through with West Point, no problem. And so, I would just offer to give yourself plenty of time. And they use a system now called MHS Genesis to keep track of all your medical information within DODMERB. And so it's really important that if you have documents that you believe help justify your condition or your situation, that you don't rely just on the system, but being able to have those ready as you start this process is really important. And that anecdote comes from my time in recruiting just a couple of years ago. And it's even more advanced now. And so what we would recommend to folks at that time is, as they begin the application, also start building that hard copy or that virtual packet if you have them, on digits or whatever it is. And so what that allows is, as the condition comes up through the medical screening process, if you have the documents already, it's a really fast add. It really doesn't pause the system and the process too long. But if not, and you're not able to find those documents, it becomes a situation where you've got to go either find them or you get a referral to counter that condition, right? And so I would just offer, do yourselves the favor. If you can gather as much as you can now, it'll just help when that comes up, right? And as you fill out that form for the medical process, what conditions or injuries or situations that you have. And so you're not going to be able to, sweep that under the rug like 30, 40 years ago. It's all there, right? And so that's whether you enlist or whether you go to the academy side. They're all using a system now called MHS Genesis. And so again, save yourselves the heartache, the time, the stress, and just go ahead and start gathering those now. If I could go back and look at that, I'd probably have something on a Google Drive or a cloud to keep everything, because paper copies can get damaged. So just wanted to offer that, and firsthand experience that it took about a year to resolve, and that was 2 separate medical processes.
Yeah. Just being transparent as well. So, I mean, if you know that you have some sort of condition or injury or something that could be flagged during this process, just to be transparent about that and bring that up, instead of trying to hide it because, maybe your freshman year, this injury flares up or this condition has some sort of adverse effect. And it's something that they can go back and see that you did have, you just never disclosed. I mean, that would obviously be a situation you would not want to find yourself in. So, those are good points. And thank you for expanding on that because I'm sure that was something that probably is not thought about as much. You know what I mean? People are like, oh, we got to apply, we got to do the congressional letter, but then not putting enough due diligence into the medical piece of it. So thank you guys.
That being said, Alyson, though, you don't want to look back to some minor thing that happened when you were 5 years old and report that has not been an issue since then. The things they're looking for are more recent, typically after age of 13, chronic conditions or, acute sports injuries, things of that nature are kind of the main ones. And you obviously have to report all that. But, you went to the doctor for something and they were, you had short breathing when you were 5 years old and they called it childhood asthma, but you've never had an inhaler, never had a problem since. That's not asthma, So don't put yourself through that issue because that could be painful. So.
Right. That's a good point. Good to know. Yeah, we don't need too much information apparently. Okay, so before we move on, can you give me, Leo, we'll start with you. What's one thing or maybe 1 or 2 things that you think that a West Point specific applicant must know? That's something that maybe they don't see on the application. Jack, I'm going to ask you the same thing so you can think on it, but like what are 1 or 2 things that you just think like you need to know this if you want to get an edge in your application?
Yeah, so what I would offer 2 things. The first being that all military branches are alike and that we deal with people as really the foundation of how we make things happen. But the Army is unique in the sense, and I think the Marines are similar as well, but we're unique in the sense that most of everything that we do requires people involved from every level. The Air Force relies on, a plane or some sort of aircraft to do their missions. As you go through the other branches, right? Merchant Marine, Navy, they're more ship oriented. And then the main difference being with the Army, and like I said, I think the Marine Corps is very similar too, that it's so much more about the camaraderie and the cohesion and the units that you're a part of than it is the equipment, right? Because the missions that you get, the tasks that you'll have can be done without the equipment in some cases, and it's not always relied upon as heavily as the people. And so, a common scenario you'll see in the Army is you'll have the highest ranking officer to the most junior, youngest soldier there, and they're both eating the same MRE, right? The meal ready to eat, survival rations, and they're both sleeping on the ground, right? And so, very unique in that sense. It's what I would offer, and then the other piece being, sorry, my dog's barking. The other piece being to remember that. Sorry, give me 1 minute. I'm going to put him back, and I'll be back.
No worries.
I guess I'll go and jump in. The Naval Academy, I think what's unique about the Naval Academy from the other services is it has a wide variety of options. Because the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy, so 20% of the graduates go into the Marine Corps. So you have that option, and as Leo said, it's there's a lot of similarities between the Marines and the Army. Marines would be a smaller version of the Army, more specific missions, but similar in a lot of respects. And then within the Navy, you have submarines, you have flight, pilot, and you have driving, ships, operating on ships, and as well as cryptology. There's medical side. There's Navy SEALs, special warfare. There's a wide variety, I think, more so than you probably find in the other services.
That's great. Thank you. Leo, did you want to wrap up your thought that you had about you're talking about the camaraderie and it's like the
Yeah,
equality across the board?
yeah, and I think Jack hit on it too, right? It's so unique in the sense of like the common struggle. And I think, across any job, across any branch that you'll do in the Army, that field problem, that deployment, like the it's not misery, but it's like this combined effort when it's tough, right? And I think those struggles look different in other places, but that ex that 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 experience of doing that and being in those environments and those situations are so commonplace across, whether it's a combat position such as the one Jack did in infantry, or logistics like myself. We, again, both laying on the ground, going to sleep at night, rain or shine, right? And so that I think is very unique to the Army and the Marines, and so that is something to consider as you apply. And we had mentioned it before, right? The purpose of why you're going to the academy, or why you're pursuing even a career in the military. There are a lot of benefits. There's a lot of reasons you should, but the foundation's got to be for the right reasons. And I think the process is stringent and challenging enough to sort of weed out those the motivators for the wrong reasons. But it is important to remember what you're going to be doing after you graduate. And so that I knew what I was getting into, right? Coming from an Army family, and growing up with my dad serving. And so I would just offer that as a consideration to sort of think about not only the academy, but it's really preparing you, like Jack mentioned, for a 20-year career or more in that military branch. So it's really important that you think about that on the front end, because it can be really disappointing, I think, if you have expectations for really 5-6 years, depending on how early you start, that it's not what you're in it to do, right? And that high almost from getting college paid for, that scholarship, can fade really quickly. But it's designed to prepare you for a lifelong career. And so, as I said, you really want to think about what you're going to be doing in the environments that you'll be in, and whether or not it's about the equipment or it's about the people would be something I would offer to think of.
Very good.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I'll just add on, just because we're both in Marines and Army. Not all the options are as physically rigorous, in the service. If you're serving on a ship or a submarine, it's a different kind of rigor, but it's not a physical laying in the dirt type of rigor. But I would say what's common across all military officer positions is that it's mentally rigorous. I mean, you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. Um, you know, for both people and materiel, and getting missions accomplished, and so mentally it's rigorous, and that's consistent no matter what role you do. But it's not all the extreme action oriented type stuff you see in movies and television. It's there's a wide variety of different paths you can take.
All right, thank you guys. That's great insight. Move on to this next one. So we're going to setting up for success. I know these are going to be a little bit redundant because we have talked a lot about some of these already, but Leo, I'm going to start with you. What are some things that you think that students can do now outside of the application and the nomination process to prepare for their likelihood of a successful admission to an academy?
Yeah, so I think the best thing that I would recommend, and I did not know about this ahead of time, is get a benchmark. And what you can do is you can look up by class. So most recent class will be 2026, 2027. And you can look at their statistics, right? And so you can see all these averages and percentiles within the most recent class. And then I would do that because you can see stats such as GPA, SAT, ACT scores, but more and those extracurriculars like yearbook activities, student president, student council, Eagle Scout. And so it's worth taking a look at that, because you can see the trends, right? You can see what's been important in the last couple of years and what hasn't been. There's team captains, there's varsity athletics. And so you can sort of bin those extracurricular activities into things that fit, that you can do something about, right? Whether that's, as I mentioned, student council, whether that's athletics, you can really see what's been a trend across the class. And so I would probably take a snapshot, maybe last 2-3 years, and then go back 10 or so years pre-COVID, because those trends will start to reappear. And I think they already are now, but we're going to see some of those recruiting trends and personnel management trends back. And so what I would say is it's about talent management at the end of the day. For a lot of these processes, it's about making sure it's the right fit. Not because you just want to, but you've got to be rounded enough that, as Jack mentioned, right, these are programs to develop military officers. And so there's some unique qualities that are inherent for each of those. And again, branch specific, but really there's some foundational attributes that need to be there. And so what I would recommend is across the board volunteering is very helpful. Community service along that tangent is also helpful. Athletics are always encouraged, but if you can get into that leadership role, where you're a team captain or a co-captain, or even junior varsity captains, right? You're displaying leadership qualities outside of the norm. And then, as I mentioned, volunteering could be everything from at your high school to community service events, to really anything, right? So long as it ties back to you're giving your time for the greater good of some other organization or purpose, right? And I think it had been mentioned in the chat, but Eagle Scout is a great one. I have a lot of buddies that went to the academy that are Eagle Scouts. And I'll just circle back to those stats. That dashboard snapshot for each of the classes is a really great anchor point to kind of mapping out what you're going to do in high school, and maybe if you've got a year or two left, or even a year, you've still got time to do something about that, right? Whether you've been there for a day or a year or 3 years, sure, there's varying degrees of how much value that adds, but collectively, whether you are or are not and whether you have or have not done those things is really important now. And so I would just, again, benchmark it, and that gives you almost a priority list on where are some areas you can improve on, and maybe expand out to what you haven't been doing.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think like the data is obviously at your fingertips, and that's what we use at Estrela a lot of times when we're guiding students. Are you going to be admissible to this military academy? Let's compare your grades, let's compare your test scores. But like you said, with the extracurriculars, I mean, we know like the most selective schools, they're looking for leaders. They want people that are going to make an immediate impact on their college campus. They're going to serve, whether it's, in an organized way through your school functions or your community, or if you're serving in ways, we see a lot of students that maybe they're caretaking for a grandparent or a parent or siblings because parents work. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy, but just showing that you're going to be making a positive impact through what you're doing outside of school. So that's a really good point. Jack, what would you say are maybe some like standout characteristics or qualities that the academies are looking for? I mean, I think leadership is definitely one we've hit on.
Yeah, I that obviously is going to be the big one. Not everybody has the tangible evidence of that at this age, though. So, in just to add on what Leah was saying, if you're a junior right now, and you're kind of looking at your resume and you feel like you're not going to be the team captain, or you don't have all the leadership, quote unquote leadership experience that on paper, well then organize it, organize something, organize some kind of service activity, organize tutoring in your school, or something through your church, or even just in the family, as Alyson said. I've had good candidates that couldn't do all the extracurricular activities that some could because they have 5 younger siblings, and they are they pick up their youngest ones from daycare at the end, after school,
Yeah.
and they're making dinner, and they're kind of parents, along with being students and along with doing a sport and doing all these things. That's okay. But just you do have time to kind of take the initiative and create that opportunity, even if it's not kind of right there in front of you, or not already part of your background. So
Yeah, and we've seen actually there's a wealth of resources out there that you can find a volunteer opportunity to so to say like I don't know where to start, I don't know who to ask. I mean, there's even a site called volunteermatch.org that we've been sending kids to, and you type in your zip code and it will populate different like nonprofits or organizations that are looking for volunteers, and you can filter it by the amount of time you have, or if you want to get down and dirty, or if you want to do more clerical work, or you want to serve certain community demographics. So there are so many options out there. And like you said, if there is something that you're really passionate about, but there's not an opportunity for it, showing that initiative to start the club or create the experience or the opportunity is, definitely something that will make you stand out. Leo, I saw you had a comment as well.
Yeah, I was just going to reinforce that initiative piece. My roommate actually, while I was there, he didn't have any of the sports. He didn't have any, extracurriculars. He was an only child too. But what he really wrote about was establishing a board game club. And on the surface, it looks pretty simple, but he made it his whole thing. His junior, I think he started at the winter of his junior year, in the summer through his senior year. But it developed, it expanded. He got the club involved in all sorts of competitions, virtually and in person, and it's still to this day a club there. And so, I think about that often, as I'm starting new projects. 16, 17-year-old buddy did it, and from the ground, right? It didn't exist, and so. I would just encourage folks, as it's been mentioned, but just take the leap. And if nothing else, right, then you can write about a challenge, a pretty significant challenge you've had, and how you went about it. And I think there's a lot of lessons you'll learn about failure and developing, and so even that is probably helpful to speak on. And so I would just encourage the leap. If nothing else, you're going to create an opportunity for yourself to talk about.
Very good. So I feel like we've talked a lot about how to stand out. So we've identified some things that you guys are looking for, or that the academies are looking for essentially, and some things that have worked for you or other applicants that you know. So I'm going to actually just skip down for sake of time, because it looks like our Q&A is filling up, and I want to make sure we dedicate some time to that. But Jack, what would you suggest if someone applies and they don't get in? Like, what are some other opportunities for them to maybe reapply, or to get,
yeah.
obviously involved with the
I
military?
mean, I encourage anybody backup plan, should be looking at the ROTC options, for each of the services. It's a great program. You get to the same place. You end up as a military officer after college. You get to do a lot of the same stuff in the summertime, which the summers are awesome. When you're going through the academies, you're traveling around, you're just doing cool stuff. And ROTC does that as well. So that's another option. Otherwise, each of the services has a prep school. If for those that maybe need more time, another year to kind of really prepare academically to be ready for the academy curriculum, they may offer a prep school option for a year, or they may offer a foundation prep school option. There's with the Naval Academy, there's the Naval Academy owned prep school up in Newport, Rhode Island. And then there's also Navy Foundation Schools, which is a network of schools that you essentially use a scholarship for that year to go and kind of continue to work on your math and sciences are the primary things that they're want to make sure that new midshipmen are ready for. So those are options you may be offered, but that's not something you apply for directly. That's just something that could be a result of the application process. Or you can enlist if you're really just eager to get into the military and serve, you can enlist, and then there's programs once you're enlisted and been enlisted for 2 or 3 years where you can apply um, through the command. You still go through the academy process, but your kind of nomination process is a little bit different. And or you go to state university or any university and reapply the next year. So I had one of my roommates, he applied 3 years in a row. He went to a school in Georgia for 2 years, had 2 years of college credit, and then kind of started over. You still have to do 4 years, even if you have 2 years and some of those credits transfer, you're still doing 4 years at the academy. But he wanted to go to the academy so bad, he just kept applying, and finally he got in. And the academy loves that. I mean, they love to see people trying and trying again. That shows commitment. So those are kind of the options.
Yeah, so there are a variety of options. Essentially, if you don't get on the first time, you can reapply. I'm definitely a proponent of ROTC options as well. My brother did Army ROTC at John Carroll. He knew that the military was for him, but he didn't want the academy, and it was perfect for him. I mean, had almost all of his school paid for. He did some amazing things during the summer. He went, overseas for a summer. He was in Alaska for a summer. He did airborne school. I mean, he had a really amazing experience. So there is definitely a fit for, every student out there.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to our last slide here, maybe. All right, so I actually had mission accomplished. There you go. I was like, I knew it was skipping. When a candidate finds out that they've got in, can you speak a little bit to the process, Jack? So what's their next step? They get the call, or they get a letter, or how does that work?
Well, so if you apply, get all your application process done, and you're board ready, so which means you've done everything except you're still waiting on the nomination, which from either senator or a representative, which those typically don't come until the end of December, January. And maybe you're still waiting on the medical qualification to come through. You can still get accepted. It's called a letter of assurance, where they essentially give you a conditional acceptance letter. And that for the Naval Academy, that's as early as September, October. West Point, I think, does as early as July of the summer before senior year. I had a candidate that got her letter, very early from West Point. And so then you're essentially accepted. So as long as you pass the medical and as long as you get the nomination, but if you go to a nomination interview with a letter, an LOA, then you're going to get a nomination. So that's not really a concern at that point. Now you don't have to formally accept that appointment until I think April 15th. And then in a lot of those that are applying kind of and finishing their application all the way up until kind of December, January, or just kind of later in the fall, there's a good chance they're not going to find out until around that April 15th, when they sent out kind of the mass announcements. It's like a lot of colleges, and then you have till May 1st to accept. So kind of quick turnaround if you're waiting till the April letters to go out or notifications.
Leo, is it about the same timeline, would you say?
Yeah, it is. I think the dates are really close. And Jack, I think you're right. I think July is the earliest we'll see it. But again, what I would offer is check online, go to the portal and see those timelines on there. I remember setting a notification on my mom's phone. I didn't have a phone at the time, but we set a reminder for when we should have heard back. And that was, like I said, 12, 13 years ago. So definitely worth checking the latest information, and I would go right to the source and find that.
Okay. And then Leo, what would you say if you accept that you got into West Point, you're going there, you accept the nomination, when do you report?
Yeah, so I reported on June 13th of my year. I think that's pretty close. Mid-June, early June is pretty close. I think I had about 3.5 weeks after high school graduation. It went pretty quick because we were getting our packing list together. We were seeing folks, saying goodbye before the summer started. and it went really fast. And so if you do get to that point, you'll get all sorts of documents and attachments that'll list out everything you'll need to be successful. But don't wait on that. There were some items like geez, I'm trying to remember now, like baby powder or foot powder, that we could not find at our local Walmart for whatever reason. And so that became like, that was our stressor, right? We were trying to find that, and it was keeping us up at night, sort of problem. But that's because we waited. It seemed like it was simple, right? We looked at it like, man, we've got all 100 of these things. It's no big deal. And the foot powder got us. So that stressed us out for a day or two. But June, yeah, mid-June is, like I said, June 13th is when I reported. I remember that because my dog was having some health issues, but he got cleared the morning of, and so and he's still around, which is pretty cool. So and he was the one barking. So yeah, I remember that, but yeah, like I said, mid-June, early June. I think it changes per year, but that'll be in your announcement too if you get accepted.
Yeah, so just being prepared that, there is a quick turnaround from graduation. You may have 2 weeks that you're gonna have to wrap everything up and head up to West Point. So, well, thank you guys so much. Like I said, we have a lot of Q&A, so I'm gonna move to the next slide. Again, we're gonna do our best to get through this. I want to be cognizant of time. We like to wrap up at about 8 o'clock, but we could stay a few minutes if that's okay with you guys, if we have some questions we need to get through. If we don't know the answer, I will save them and I will do my best to get those answers to you, but I'm going to try to deflect them to you guys as well. So the first question is, can you submit the Academy application as early as the summer before your senior year? That's a yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we talked a little bit about that, that they open up a little bit earlier. When should you apply for summer seminar or summer leadership institute? I missed what you said at the beginning.
Yeah, that's going to be typically February, March. I think this year the applications were due, I think, by April 15th,
Okay.
Of the junior year. So
if you are unable to do the summer programs, will this be seen as like an X or a negative on an applicant's application?
yeah, doesn't hurt, but it can help. It will help.
Yep.
Okay. One here. What is the purpose of the preliminary application? I had a student with a 2.8 GPA and 1100 SAT get approved through the preliminary application process, which gave him the idea that he was a viable candidate for the Naval Academy when his credentials were nowhere near where they should be to be considered for a nomination or be admissible. So what's the preliminary application?
Again, it's a whole person, the application, they're looking at the whole person. So just a GPA and test score does not tell you enough about that individual. They could have they could be an amazing athlete, amazing experience, amazing leader, a lot of service, all kinds of things. And that's what the full application kind of brings out. And then they also could be looking at a candidate like that as a candidate for the prep school. So
good point. So kind of like back to what Leo said too, just doing that due diligence to see those profiles of the last few classes of admitted students. And if you see that your GPA is nowhere near, or your test scores aren't where they need to be, like maybe this isn't worth the time to apply, but maybe they are someone who, they can explain why that is, that their GPA is very low, or they didn't have access to a testing site. So it's a good point. Okay, so if you're an Eagle Scout and a Sea Scout quartermaster, is there any advantage? We'll just, there's a couple questions within the question. So
yeah, I would say yes. It just shows well-rounded, and as Jack's mentioned a couple of times already, it's a full candidate picture. And we're looking at talent and potential. And so, yeah, I would say any sort of extracurricular, especially Eagle Scout with the service connection with that senior project, I think that's great.
Okay. Are there any specific physical trainers that coach for the Military Academy guidelines? I mean, it sounds like from what you said, I mean, it's a pretty, like you can get the information online, and maybe if you did it preliminary maybe I'm answering the question for you, but from like a preliminary standpoint, seeing what you're not good at and like improving on your push-ups. I mean, but maybe there are trainers that do this.
Yeah, there may be. I'm not aware of any folks that specifically train up candidates. But I do remember there, if I remember searching candidate fitness assessment, like workout plan or something, on a school library computer, and I did get something. I printed it out. But again, following the events, I very similar push-ups, pull-ups, running, sit-ups, and so um, I would take a look at the standards for the CFA and then sort of do a gut check to see where you're at. And if you're not at the mark, maybe you know what to focus on, as you mentioned, Alyson. But I'm not aware of any sponsored programs or trainers that are correlated with that.
Okay.
Neither am I. And just one thing to add, though, is you're preparing for CFA, just take note of the timeline. It's about 5 minutes per event. And that's what some people disregard when they're training. They only do pull-up session. They only do push-up session. I encourage anybody that's kind of training specifically for that assessment um, to train and with very short recovery. If you get used to that short recovery, because when you get to the mile run, it's very different if you go out to do a mile run fresh than after your muscles are kind of pumpy from doing all the pull-ups and push-ups and whatnot.
Point. Okay, in your experience, is the Air Force Academy as strict as the Naval Academy for the medical screening?
I could not speak to Air Force. I haven't had many candidates applying to both Air Force and Naval. It always seems to be West Point. It could be just where I'm located in Ohio, and yeah, but it's usually West Point and Naval Academy or where they're applying. It does seem like West Point tends to be more lenient on the waivers, and I don't know if there's a reason behind that, but that's just anecdotally that's my experience.
Okay. Yeah, that might be something that would be good to reach out to the Air Force and see if the Air Force Academy and see if there is something specific that they're looking for medically that might disqualify a candidate. And then would exercise-induced asthma impede you from the medical?
I think if it's an ongoing issue still, as a 16, 17-year-old, that could be an issue. I can't speak directly to what the guidelines are. I know it's definitely something that would require a waiver.
Okay. And then also is nominated as being a part of Boy State of any value?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure like leadership and just showing your interest in government processes and whatnot definitely would be something they would like to see. All right, someone had commented here that each congressional office will have a staffer that handles the service academy applicants. Candidates don't need to go directly to a congressional office. They can download a nomination packet that needs to be completed and sent back to the office. Competitive candidates will then be interviewed by a panel of retired military who will provide the congressional office with their ordered list of candidates. So someone who definitely has done their research or knows this process quite well. So thank you for sharing that. We appreciate that. It's good to know. Okay, this is a specific one. Is having a gallbladder removed considered a disqualifying event?
I can help kind of answer this. It's similar standards right across the board. And a common thing that we used to say while I was in recruiting is we're not doctors. So if it doesn't fall within one of those bins, that's a clear disqualifying condition. It's worth going to get it evaluated, right? For the potential of being able to perform at the levels that you need to. And Jack had mentioned it too, right? That I would not disqualify yourself if it doesn't fall into one of those very strict conditions or bins, for what isn't going to be okay. But if it's in that area where you're not sure, I would again go through the process to see, at least on the medical side, where you're at, and then right? Because if you go based off the blogs or Reddit or even now, right, where we're not the authority on that, you could miss out, right, and potentially a condition that you think isn't going to go or should go, right. It's not up to us, right? It's up to that MEPS doctor, the military entry processing station doctor that you'll evaluate if needed at that level. And so, yeah, I would just say, if you're not exactly sure and you want to do this, you'll never know if you don't try, right? And a lot of times, I mentioned earlier too, with the referrals, you'll be able to validate if that condition affects you or impedes you or not. And so the childhood asthma is one we hear all the time when I was in recruiting. And we would go have the individual, the applicant, go do a pulmonary functions test, prove that that condition that popped on their record through the screening, that they believed, actually sometimes they didn't even know they had it, right? But those that did, that they thought that was an automatic disqualifier, and in most cases it wasn't, right? So again, depending on the doctor, depending on the standards for the waivers of the academy, but broadly speaking, you're not going to know if you don't go through it. But there are some very clear ones that outline, things that are non-waiverable, and those truly are non-waiverable. And so, if you match those up, you should be able to kind of trace down what is in the gray area or what's not clearly laid out, and then give yourself an answer that way.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so looks like one of our participants is really super knowledgeable about this process. So I am very grateful for the input. So you can see it maybe in the Q&A, guys, but talks a little bit about the selection for attendance for summer leadership experience is done in April of the candidate's junior year. West Point needs a standardized test score to evaluate a candidate's potential. So make sure you're taking the SAT and ACT first semester or early on in your junior year, and making sure that those test scores are being sent directly to the service academy so you can denote that when you're taking the test. West Point offer date is 1st of May. The acceptance of your appointment is 1st of May, and the report date is July 1. Making sure that your candidates are using their blue and gold representatives and the field force representatives. Just making sure you get that edge and making those connections and resolving any issues that you may have. Another thing was listing that at West Point, you can also get to West Point by enlisting through the Army. Every year, West Point sets aside 200 slots for soldiers, and they are never filled all the way. So that's again, if you don't get in and you decide to enlist, you can get into it that way. And then utilizing, I was going to mention this too, actually, when we were talking about the trainer. Like, I was on YouTube because I had a student who was interested in doing the summer academy at the Air Force Academy, and she was asking me all about the physical fitness stuff, and I sent her some videos via YouTube. So there are YouTube videos on the CFA, like how to train, different programs and things like that. So you can see how to properly do a basketball throw. And then, all right, we'll wrap it up with this will be our last question for tonight. I have long hair. Would that hinder me in the application process? I know that if I attend a military academy, I'm probably going to have to cut it, but can you have long hair as an applicant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's all coming off when you get there.
I feel like that's a good lighthearted end to this, I mean, you can have the long hair and you apply, and I mean, maybe for an interview, should you cut it?
It's if it were me, and I wanted to show my commitment, I probably would, but would I use it against someone no, I wouldn't. If I, as an interviewer, I wouldn't use it against it.
Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting question. I figured that would be a good one to end with. So I want to thank you guys so much for giving your time and just your input and knowledge into this process. And thank you to our participants that have come on and shared your evening with us, and just for your insight and your great questions. I will send this recording out to everyone who has registered. I will send out Jack and Leo's contact information. So if you do have further questions, please let them know. If there was a question that you had that wasn't answered, or if you needed some more information about something, I would gladly do that due diligence for you or connect you to someone who has the answer. So thank you again. I really appreciate your time. Estrela really appreciates your time, and hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Alyson. Take care.
Thank you.